Welcome to Heart Speak Podcast, episode 101. We're not alone. Well, welcome again, and I hope your week is maybe not flowing smoothly, but at least you're riding the waves as Mars is just going retrograde and Jupiter is about to go direct, and lots is happening in our world, all over the world. And there are storms, there are fires, and we here have just had our first winter storm at the beginning of September, really a record. And these changes, these storms, these changes within Mother Nature are really stirring up, not just the embers of a fire, but probably the embers that have been laying dormant deep within our earth, deep within our own soil, as I talked about last time. And that soil stirring up, that awakening of our junk DNA is really making us question, who are we? What does it mean to be human? And that definition is not as clear as I sometimes hear people want to make. I'm human and there's this. No, it's not so simple. And we need to understand the vastness of our history, which is not just a few hundred years, a few thousand years, but the first type of erect humans with a larger brain actually appeared about 2 million years, 3 million years ago, give or take a few million. But of course, the dinosaurs were 65 million years ago, and the first apes were probably about 15 million years ago. So in the span of our life, 70 years, 80 years, it's huge of how much energy, how much history has entered into making me who I am now. The first so-called modern humans were about 350,000 years ago. But prior to that, there were many different prototypes of who we are now. And that came into our beingness, what we call our genes. That's the place that we store that. And then we store, obviously, information in our brains as well as to our experience because of the expression of those genes. But I'm not just wanting to get into history. I'm just wanting, in this podcast, to really open us up to not being small anymore. And I wanted to do this podcast for some time, but I kind of had to bring everything together. And I've had a few sleepless nights because it's information that I want you to hear, but not hide from. I'm giving this information to expand us. But in that expanding, it may come that you'll say, wow, I didn't know that about me, because there has been a tendency to be protected and those outsiders to protect us from knowing who we are. And now we're in a stage where we don't need protecting. We need to know. Isn't that true? Maybe some of you want to switch this podcast off now. I don't want to know. I'm really happy with just thinking I'm this little human who lives, for 80 years and that's it. And I don't want to know about past lives, future lives, etc. That's okay. If that works for you, just to move on, switch off the podcast and just live that life and say, I'm just a human who just has a job and goes to work, has children, pays my mortgage, and then I die. But we're much more. And if you're still listening to me, it's because you know that. You know that if this great awakening that's happening is awakening us, awakening our genes, waking up the essence of who we are within every cell, then it's time not to be protected or ask that we stay small in who we are. And I believe that I'm talking to you because you're listening now to say, yes, I've always known that there were more things about me than just what was on the surface, the skin color or the gender or where I was born. I'm much, much more than that. And that's why I want to share this today. And I go back into my own history. I've really been asking myself, how do I share this? As a child, I was highly intuitive, and I've only ever known what it was like to be able to see energies, communicate with different energies, etc. But my greatest challenge was that when I met someone, I would see many different faces, energies of this person as they came towards me. And it is actually easier for me to just say energies. I could see their different energies, frequencies in layers. Now, as a child, this kind of terrified me, or more confused me would be a better word, especially when I was asked to introduce myself to these people and I really didn't know which one I was introducing myself to. And consequently, I just decided to be very shy and hide. And some of you have heard that story before, and maybe you did the same thing. So I was told off sometimes by my very gregarious mother, who would say, come on, come out and meet everybody. And it was like, this room is really full of energy. So could we just decide how many people we should have? There was definitely no social distancing going on. Let's just put it that way. So when I was a child, that was what happened. As I grew into my teenage years, then I really became more aware, not so necessarily of energies that I feared, but more energies of suffering. I think you've heard me say that. So that if there was a particular part of this individual that was suffering, I would find that really hard to accept, and I would faint to get away from the suffering. So let's move on a few decades, and I started to make sense of what had happened to me as a child. And when people wanted me to explain it, I would say, well, I saw people's subpersonalities, I saw their past lives, because that was a way of saying, yes, this was the same individual just living out different personalities, different lives, and they still had two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And that was a way in which I could explain it. But in truth, it wasn't that way. It wasn't the fact that I was seeing a pure human model. Now, you're going to be saying, well, what did they look like? Many a time it was more of a feeling or an energy, because what I can see psychically really can only flow through my mindset. And that's true for all of us. So that as I'm teaching intuition, it often's the case that our brain cannot decipher what we're taking in, and therefore we use language which is typical of us in that moment. And that's why sometimes it's easier for me to use metaphors or analogies rather than saying this is this is the individual, they've got, as I say, two arms, two legs. So when we're seeing ourselves, and I say we're not alone, I think it would be better for me to be able to say, you and I are not alone even in ourselves. Even when we say, I'm alone, boy, there's a lot of energy around us or in us. And that's what I want to look at today, because there's a lot of talk coming up as we move towards what's called the hybrid race, or moving towards understanding ourselves as hybrids. That hybridization has already happened. It's not something to say, oh, I'm going to become more like a star person, or I'm going to become more like this or that. I'm going to accept. It's more of an acceptance of who we are. And the age we're moving into, and as far as the Maya see it, is this age where it's unity through the acceptance of diversity, the age of the sixth sun. So the unity through acceptance of diversity, we might say, yes, that's what's happening in the outer world. We're becoming more accepting. Well, maybe we are, maybe we're not. But the acceptance of diversity starts with us. We have to accept our own diversity first. And in some ways, we have to wake up to who we are, or even grow up to who we are. And the more we put ourselves in saying, I'm just this type of person, I want to stay small, I want to be good, I want to only work in the light. Whenever we make distinctions like that, we're almost saying, because I know there's another way. So the very protection that we may put around us or inside us or use as mantras is really a way of protecting ourselves from ourselves. And once we open up to who we are, then we open up to seeing the world very differently, the world we live in very differently. I'm being very careful here because everything is conscious, everything is a life force. And my own mantra was always, let me be all that I am. which probably wasn't a great idea, but it's what I always use, what I still say. Let me live my full soul's incarnation, which, you might just say is, oh, let me, do what I'm meant to do on this planet. No, I've always said, let me know all that I am. Let me know who I am so I can express all that I am and then be accountable for all that I am. That's what I'm saying, and let me be all that I am. And I know many of you are maybe making that same statement with a little bit of care. So who are we? And this is the challenge, because I'm wanting us to look outside our solar system, outside our galaxy, outside our universe. Many years ago, someone said, you do know you don't come from this universe. And I just went, of course. That's the way I usually do it. Of course, I know that. And then I thought, because we don't live in a one verse. We live in a multiverse. So it's much better to say we're a multiverse being. And that multiverse can be defined as science might define it in terms of dimensions. And scientifically, we say, oh, yes, there are 11 dimensions. That's what's been proven. But there are many more dimensions. And I found that as I listen to different people, this idea of dimensions is becoming more confusing. We live in a 3D world, a three-dimensional world, four-dimensional, five-dimensional. And then we start talking about these different dimensions that exist. And I'm just always very careful. You'll hear me say that, because knowing that there are many, many dimensions, I try not to see them, let me say, in a hierarchical way. Oh, I don't live in that dimension, I live in this dimension. It's not, can we move the words dimension to almost frequency? What frequencies exist within me? What octaves exist within me? And if we're honest, there's frequencies that cannot exist within a human form. It's just that the frequency of our form, our physical form, is not expansive enough to take very high frequencies. So that if I'm working just with spiritual guidance, and these words are all out there, that sometimes a spirit guide has to lower its frequency to such a level that it loses touch with what the energy it's bringing in. So a certain spirit may be living, and we're using that word loosely, but a spiritual guide may be living with a very high frequency, again, not hierarchical, but just their frequency is different from our physical body, may be difficult to interact with us at that level. At the same time, my physical body may not be able to accommodate all the frequencies that exist within me that we call the subtle bodies, or the spiritual, my spirit, my soul. These words are so confusing. So let me just say again, the energies that exist within me, and I will call them, just for this, the higher energies, the spirit energies, may have difficulty living within my physical body. So that many a time, and I'm seeing that now, we have to adapt our physical body. We have to go through changes within our physical body that may be painful. They may be changes that cause us rashes or pains in our body, or different things happen to our physical body that have to increase the frequency of our physical body to allow us to embody the true energies that exist in our spirit. Does that make sense? So that, for instance, when I went through menopause, I had to give up drinking. I don't take drugs. I don't smoke, because I couldn't stay in my body with alcohol. But I also started eating meat. So I'm not saying, oh, I had to then take lighter food. I had to take food that is very clean and not going to bring a lot of toxins into my body. But I needed to have the meat almost to give me ballast to be able to stay in my body as I embodied many more of my spiritual frequencies. And I'm saying that because I think some of you are going through those steps. And I found that just living, I was vegetarian for a long time, I couldn't stay in my body. I couldn't embody these other energies, these other frequencies. So being very mindful of what works for you, what works for your body, and how literally our body accommodates us. And the more we root into the world and the more deeper we root into the world, the more easy it is for actually us to expand our consciousness, if we'll use those words. Or to, again, let me use the word, embody our true consciousness. That's a much better way of saying it. It's not that we're expanding out of our body. What there is a lot of consciousness that is us that wants to come into our body, wants to express itself through this wonderful thing that we call our body. All right? So we are made up of a complex history of genetic changes, intercourse, interactiveness with different frequencies. Now, the best known of these are ones that come from Anunnaki. Okay, I'll stay with those just for a moment, then I'll bring in others. Anunnaki are a group of ETs. Now, let me take one step back. All of us are ETs. All of us come from somewhere else. I believe, and it's said that I believe the 22 different chromosome types are made up of 22 different groups of aliens, ETs, extraterrestrials, beings who did not exist on this planet prior to maybe an evolutionary shift that took place. So these evolutionary shifts, as I said, we've been around for maybe 3 million years at least, but the modern has only been around 300, 350,000 years ago. So we've had these evolutionary shifts which are understood to have occurred when different groups of ETs have had intercourse with the humans. So it's almost like the ET has met up with a human, usually a female, brought that genetic information into her, and she has given birth to a new humanoid, a new human. All right? So there have been genetic engineering taking place through, we could say, natural intercourse. And that has sometimes been a planned experience, or sometimes it's just happened. This interaction between different species has happened for millions of years. And so to be able to define ourselves as just one group is impossible. It's like looking at a group of individuals where there's been a high immigration and people have intermarried, and you'll say, well, I'm just a typical. Well, you're not, because you've got all this other energy going into you. So coming back to saying, I believe our modern human is made up of at least 22 different groups, which gives us the 22 different groups of chromosomes. All right? And then there was a definition into the masculine and feminine. But prior to that, I believe we've had many interactions between different races, different species from different parts of the universe. So it's really hard to say what it is to be just a pure human. And are we as humans just the same? Absolutely not. Am I making sense here? I'm trying to broaden our minds away from thinking, as I say, we're just live 80 years, or even that our existence is 400 years or a few thousand years. We're millions of years of genetic change, genetic interaction with other beings. And that means that we are all ETs, we are all aliens, or our genetic information has a frequency in us that comes from all those millions of years of interaction with the multiverse. Okay, so then we come back to the Anunnaki. They are one group that is seen in the Bible. They're talked about in the Bible, where the gods came in and had intercourse with the women, etc. So the giants coming in and having intercourse with what we call humans then. But again, that human woman wasn't necessarily just an individual that had no genetic information in her already. But what we see is that these Anunnaki probably, if you look at the Sumerian text, which is probably about 4,000 years BC, you kind of feel, well, then maybe this group particularly came in about 4,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago. But it's not true. If there's been any group that has had an influence on humanity's consciousness and its growth, has been the Anunnaki. And we now see that they've been around and having interactions with us for 150,000 years. Now, I already tripped myself up. I am an Anunnaki, you are an Anunnaki. So it's not that they have been having interaction with us, it's we've been interacting with each other for a long time. And we, let's call it we, as an Anunnakian, have made different decisions to say, what is it that we want us as humans to experience? Now, that might be a big mindset for you to say, well, hang on a minute, aren't I me, the human, and they, the God, or they, the ET? I want us to kind of try to move away from the they and us situation, so that the Anunnaki, maybe me as an Anunnaki, also has had an experience with me, the human. But as an overall gesture, and I'm only talking about one group here, there has always been the choice as what is it? Why do we have a planet Earth? Why do we have so-called humans? Why bother? There's plenty of other planets, plenty of other galaxies we could live in. The difference we believe about this planet, and now let's come to our planet, that she is also a very conscious being, called her Gaia. We have other names for her, but she is also evolving. So rather than seeing her something that we live on or live in or have some experience with, that's where humans, again, we've separated ourselves. So our body is made up of the very elements and frequencies of our Mother Earth. Again, I'm stepping back, trying not to get too confusing here. But Mother Earth is a conscious being who at this moment in time is evolving into her perfect state. Some might say on the 12th dimension, but again, I'm trying to stay away from numbers. So she is going through her own evolution. That's why our bodies are going through their own evolution. That's what I was describing. Our bodies are changing. And sometimes this bodily change, as I described last time, is difficult because of the things that have happened to our bodies, the drugs we've taken, the things that have happened to us that we can't adapt. And when there's lack of adaptability, it's more likely that we will drop the cloak, which means to die, and say, okay, I'm going to come back in a different cloak. So some people who are dying at present, it's just that their body can't adapt to the frequencies that are coming in because A, it may well be because of they've taken into their body, but B, they may just not want to adapt. In other words, they might say, I'm ready to let go of this cloak and let's go to another one. So again, this concept of, well, we must always stay alive is failing. It's like saying you must stay in the junior school all your life, never go on to another one. So the fact that people are dying at this time, I'm not going to put one label on, but it has a lot to do with frequencies and it has a lot to do with opportunities. This is a huge opportunity to shift. Sometimes that shift can be, I'm going to embody more of myself. Sometimes it's, I'm going to leave this planet and go somewhere else. All right? Coming back to planet Earth, she is a living being and she has within her core fire. That fire means that she's a very creative being. Many planets, we believe, don't have fire in their center. Without that fire, that creativity doesn't occur. So something unique about this planet is her creativity, in other words, making new. And this planet is made up of that creativity, which gives humans, or these beings, us beings who live here, and again, we're not alone, the chance to have free will, to make changes. And that's part of the uniqueness of having what we call a human body. The word human means creative man or creative being. So let's say, hey, I'm a creative being living on a creative planet that is also evolving. And to be creative is not just to make something, it's to expand ourselves. and to remember that creativity is not a one-way journey. It isn't, I'm just going to express this into the world. To be expanded means to be accountable for what we've created, to eat the fruits of our endeavors, to own the wisdom of what we've created, because our expansion isn't from our creation, it's from our gaining of wisdom. This is a lot of information in this podcast. Okay, so here I am living on an expanding earth. She is a living being with other expanding beings. We're all creative beings with other beings who live in this earth, on this earth, around this earth. So stay with me here. The Anunnaki have kept giving us one group, just one group of, I mean, I could say there are 22 different groups, but we've just been talking about the Anunnaki. They have been bringing genetic information that has woken us up or interacted or added to the genetic information we already have. Now, you remember I talked about that's what a virus does. A virus brings genetic information that literally either wakens something up or changes our DNA. Oh, this is why I wanted to talk about this. So rather than seeing a group of ETs who have affected us negatively or positively, it's been sometimes something has been added to my DNA from my higher self, but let me call it my Anarchy being, that has actually shifted my way of being able to be more creative, more expressive. And as everything, there are good and bad beings. So that sometimes an Anarchian or another of these different groups have come in and given me genes that have suppressed who I am. And in a kind of a broad stereotype picture, there is this idea, because we see it played out here on the planet, of is a human a god? Is a human as clever as any other group, like an Anunnakian, or are we just the slaves? And this is really what's being played out at the moment. Who are we? Are we someone who's just going around, as I say, and being controlled by our own fears of being big, or are we willing to take on our bigness? Are we willing to take on our power? This is big. Breathe, everybody, just breathe. All right. So I'll come back to the Anunnaki, but many of you might say, well, I think I come from the Pleiades. I think I come from Sirius. I think I'm an Arcturian. All of that may be true. But recognize that the Pleiades, Sirius, these are different groups of stars that we see in our sky, the Arcturus, different galaxies. Recognize there are billions of galaxies and billions of stars and billions of planets going around these stars. And there's probably a multiverse. So I have no problem if you say I carry Palladian energy or Sirian energy, Arcturian energy, and I've seen myself as one of these. But recognize that's probably true, but these are almost way stations to being here on this earth. And remember that, again, what my experience is when I've worked with guides is that guide will take on a form that will allow you to feel safe with that guide. So it often will appear humanoid. Again, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, arms and legs. But that form will only be taking on that form partly to be able to access this particular atmosphere that is our Earth, and partly so that we don't run away. So if something came to you that looked very, very strange, you'd probably go, oh, that can't be my guide. I mean, just as I would say, as most people say, oh, my guides are Egyptians or Atlanteans or Lemurians or Native Americans. But if Attila the Hun came, you'd probably go, that can't be my guide. No. So you understand how there are many beings who are working with us, not because we're lesser, but because we are part of that soul family or star family, and they're saying, I will come to you in a form that you will find acceptable and easy for me to handle. All right, so there are many ET groups, and we call them extraterrestrial. It's almost like they are of a frequency that does not naturally live all its time on this earth. I'm trying to be very careful with my words here. We all belong to these different, or let's say my genetic information belongs to these different star groups. Let me put it that way. So my genetic information may look similar to yours, but as I say, we're only just starting to understand the junk DNA. And rather than looking at a strand of DNA and saying, no, look, we've all got the same, it's not the DNA that matters, it's how it connects to itself. You understand me? It's like, I'll use a jigsaw pattern again. It may well be we have all the different, maybe we have similar pieces of jigsaw, but it's how we connect them that make me who I am. It is the connection that makes me who I am, not the fact that I have similar pieces to you. That's consciousness. Consciousness is the connectivity of different parts to define who I am. There you go, there's a big statement. So forget saying we're all the same. We are not. It's dependent on how my bits have connected. And that connection has come really what we call consciousness. Right. All right. So can we put star beings out there at the moment and other, just for a moment? I want to just I am going to bring now what's happening on this earth. We are not alone. We have, as I've described, a living, breathing, evolving Mother Earth. At different times in our culture where there's been a catastrophe, or in other words, humanity has made we've made a bit of a mess of things, again, not making us small, but through our brilliance or our ingenuity, sometimes we have caused crisis and chaos on our own earth. Mother Earth has just shaken herself and we've flown off like fleas off a dog. But certain beings, and it's hard to call different words, certain beings, and they have a human experience, have learned how to live within our earth, or they've gone to places that are very high up in the mountains. That's natural. If there's going to be a flood, if there's going to be a disaster, you either go into something or you go above it. There are many tunnels and caves that have already been built for people to escape into if we have a crisis on this planet. So this is why we have stories about Shangri-La or Shambhala, or the stories about beings within the earth, Vril, the energy of the earth. And I've had the opportunity to actually experience this through my meditations of these portals into the inner world. And there are many stories of people entering these places and then coming back what they thought was just a day away, and it was 100 years have passed and everybody had died, but they looked the same age. And I was always fascinated by these stories. So the ability to change our frequency, to be able to live within the earth or at high altitudes, is what we as, again, humans, creative beings, have learned to do. How do we shift frequencies so that we don't exist, or we can exist on the earth without aging or without dying? And this has been something we've been able to do for hundreds of thousands of years. So this idea of dying or keeping your body alive, it's happened, but we don't need to put it into some vault. We know how to do this by shifting our frequency. I'm not going to say that this is our lesson next week, but we know how to do this. And what we learned in living within the earth was to actually create oxygen for us to live within. And I've seen how we created a green light, a form of chlorophyll that we could actually build oxygen from in order to live. Now, again, we adapted our body. We didn't need the same type of oxygen, but we've known how to live within the earth, and we've become strong within that. And at the same time, we've known how to interconnect with other beings who live within the earth. Okay, so this is my final piece of this. That at different times of evolution, I'll call it that rather than crisis, there have been times where we have left this planet because we knew how to change our frequency. Literally, that's all that ETs need to do. We do not need a little spaceship that goes flash, flash, flash. We know how to shift our frequency, drop the cloak that we've been wearing, and move to another frequency, and then we can choose to come back again. But we've also had times where we may have chosen to stay here. And there are Lemurians that are walking this earth now. There are Atlanteans. There are other beings who are walking this earth, but they have strict instructions that they're not allowed to interfere with where humanity is at this present time. They can help, but they must not interfere. Okay, and I've met a few of these different beings. They're often, the Lemurians were much taller. They have different energies. And then there are what we call the Deva kingdoms. And the Deva kingdoms are another evolutionary group, but they are what we call the fairies, the elves, the dwarfs, etc. But they also are part of the Anunnaki. That's why I'm coming back to the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki really left behind different groups who were not left behind. Different groups chose to be here to be looking after the forests, or looking after the waters, or carry the wisdom. And I don't believe it's only the Anunnaki that have done this. So when you look at the different words that the Anunnaki have been described by, we often have this word Elohim, which means God, or the shining ones, that's often what they're called, the shining ones, because they look bright. Their light body is very bright. But often this word El you see coming through. So those Anunnaki who take care of the forests are called elves. All right, that's where they come from. They're not little people. That word was used mainly by, I'll say the Christian church, the Catholic church, different churches, to diminish someone. So it's not uncommon for us to hear that there were a little group of people, the Menua in Hawaii, little people created this. But that's a way of us saying we can't think that they're bigger than us. They can't be giants. And they often were. When we see massive walls being built, they were built by larger people than little people. All these little people had amazing skills, as we talked about before. So elves, fairies, dwarfs are all part, I'm going to say they all have an element of star beingness in them. And they are, we would say, walking another path along with us. So that, yes, I've met little beings within forests and within streams, but they always have a larger guardian looking after them. And it's much more attuned to looking at those that were in Lord of the Rings rather than anything else. And the Tuatha, the people that were seen as the mythical people of Ireland, who have the ability to have powers, called the She, they really have lived within the earth. So many times of, again, crisis or change, those beings who have walked the earth thought that this is not a place they want to be anymore, and they've gone into the earth. Or they've gone back into what we call the forest. They've gone back into the energy that exists on this planet. And I would say there are many beings living on this planet, but really, if we see the planet as not a solid object, they literally are the frequency that makes up the planet. Oh, this is a step more. Instead of seeing a tree as a tree, see it as a frequency that can interchange with frequencies off this planet. Instead of seeing a stone as just a stone that's sitting there, see it as it's like a portal of change. It's like an energy source where we can move in and out if we have that frequency of being a stone person or the frequency of being a tree person. So the objects that we see, as I say, trees, stones, etc., that we may take for granted, they are literally portals. And that's what I'm just receiving literally at this moment for us to understand. And they're like an energy, how can I put it? It's like when a being enters into being a tree, it literally is able to change its frequency and I'll say leave this particular frequency that we call our planet. Okay. I may need to come back to that, but that was a big part I just want to share with you. We have the Deva kingdoms, but they are not small people who are just like our God, we use them. They are mighty beings who have been suppressed by often other cultures. We call it the church, we call it different forms, who have found these very threatening to know that they're around. Fear them, stay away from them, and these are bad people. But actually, they're people who were here long before us, and that when we respect them and honor them, they can teach us a lot. Okay, so now I'm coming to my very last piece, and I know I said that was, but this is a really important package I'm putting together. I hope you appreciate that. Then there are thought forms and beings who do not exist within a human form, but we've captured them, or they've been captured, or they've come into this energy. And what I appreciate is there are times where we have expanded ourselves, our consciousness, maybe by taking peyote, ayahuasca, different drugs. We have experimented with entering these multiverses. And sometimes we have then brought back energies that weren't necessarily fully adapted to a three-dimensional world. They came from the fourth dimension, maybe the fifth dimension. And other times, the beings who don't live fully in this earth have also entered in. So there's been an exchange of energy. Sometimes we've even done genetic engineering way back in time, and we have manifested something that then exists in our consciousness. It exists there, but it doesn't fully change. It can't die, it can't live. There are many forms like that live within the fourth dimension. And one of that group we might call the reptilian group. And I wanted to mention this. The reptilians are a group of beings who primarily live within the fourth dimension. But this is such a big subject, and I'm so sorry, but I've got to put it all together. Every time we see a group, we need to understand that they're not just good or bad. And the reptilians, the highest level of reptilian, are what we call the serpent people or the dragon people, and they are the wise people. And then we have the lower forms of reptilians who don't have that wisdom, are just expressing themselves as a reptile would be, as a cold-blooded being that needs to take the warm blood or the warm energy from someone in order to exist. I don't want us to see every reptilian as bad. I don't want to see it in that way. I want to say that there are high levels of Anunnaki, there are low levels of Anunnaki, there are high levels of Pleiadians, there are low. It's not so simple as saying this is good and this is bad. There are ET groups that don't wish us well, and there are ones who wish us well, just because it's like every human being. And the most important thing is for us to recognize that within ourselves. Because when I come back to my childhood and I say there are different groups that live within us, and that's what I could see as a child, I could see different beings. I will call them, what can I call them? Denser energies, or energies that weren't always of, I don't want to call light, but they were either hidden in the darkness, or they were energies that were not always conducive to the best for this individual. I'm trying to use words, because I don't want to say they were good or bad. We all own energies that could be destructive. Let me put it that way. And if you say, no, not me, I'm sorry, but it means that you're still trying to live in this small world of 70 or 80 years of life. Every one of us has energies within us that can be ones that move us, that are life-giving, and ones that are life-taking. That's what we are. But when we're separated from those, we cause ourselves more damage than we do if we just accepted them. And once we accept them into our heart, we can make a shift. I have met individuals who have fully embodied and accepted into their heart these energies. And I have met individuals who don't even know that they are being controlled by that energy. And then I have met individuals who made what I call a pact with the devil, where sometime in a past life, they said to this individual, okay, if you will give me some certain powers, I can then become more powerful, more wise, whatever, but we can't ever separate. And I've seen that happen. And often I've seen it in people who have used psychic abilities, who have maybe marked psychic abilities or healing abilities. And I've seen the energy that gives them that power. And I've also seen that they have a fear of losing that connection to that energy source, because if they do, they lose those powers. And you might say, well, it sounds as if they're possessed. No, I call it a deal, a contract we make. And when we make that contract, what I see is that sometimes the energy we've contracted, we've linked to, when I've talked to it, it says, please tell that person to let me go, because I can't evolve while I'm connected to them. So it's not that an energy will come and possess you. It's sometimes we've asked or we've connected to it, and none of us are evolving because we're so caught up in that energy. This is a very big subject, and I appreciate I may need to come back to this at a later date, because I see so much, and I hope you're realizing I'm not telling you anything that I haven't seen in my years of working and being on this planet. I want to come back to the reptilian individuals who are not of wisdom, not of the highest energy, are those, as I say, who live on other people's fear, they're looking for warm-blooded individuals so they can take that energy and they feed on fear. And some of us may just carry that energy. We like to incite fear in people. We like, and you might say, no, I never do that. Well, come on, everybody does a little bit of something. It's maybe not your reptilian self, but sometimes we steal energy. We can vampire people's energy very quickly by telling them, shaming them, or being critical of them. But someone who is pure reptilian is very cold-blooded. We might call them a psychopath or a sociopath. And the ones that are working highly at the moment are those who really don't care about other humans. All they care about is creating fear. And they've often been described as those who are more eloquent. They're very, very good at speaking. They often lick their lips a lot. They're very charming, and they hypnotize with their eyes, so that you can see in their eyes there's a sort of grayness. Now, I'm not saying everybody who looks like that must be a bad person, but I am saying is when part of our expansion of consciousness, part of our growing up, is not to say this is a bad person or a good person. First of all, it's where is that in me? Second, where am I choosing not to offer that person fear or power? Because that's the only thing they want. There are people who are literally feeding off other people's fear, especially children's, and I don't want to go down that path. But this has to stop. And my way is not necessarily by saying, oh, I'm going to protect myself. It's saying, I will see you for who you are. And the exposure I'm wanting to see is nobody should be hiding in the shadows anymore. If you choose to step out for who you are, be seen. That's what I've seen all my life. I've seen you. Doesn't mean I don't love you. Doesn't mean I don't have compassion for you. Doesn't mean that I don't see myself in you. But no more hiding. No more hiding from yourself. No more hiding from me. No more hiding from anybody else. The reptilian energy doesn't want love. I found that out for myself. It needs to be accepted. And when it's accepted into your heart, it changes its energy. So it's no good just sending love and light to everybody. Many of these beings don't have a humanoid experience in that way. So they say, what are you doing? What I'd say is seeing, hearing, accepting, knowing that this exists on my planet with us is the way to say, I choose to see you, but I give you no energy. That's the shift. I know I keep saying finally, but I need to bring in the Greys. There was one other group that you will have seen many times where people talked about ETs, and they're called the Greys. Very simply, the Greys were another group similar to ourselves. They do tend to have these big eyes and look grey and have these oval share heads. They are a group of individuals who were very similar to us, but decided to genetically engineer their emotions because they thought their emotions were the problem they were having, which were causing the wars, etc. It's probably very true. But when they genetically engineered out the emotional body, they could no longer reproduce because it is our emotions that generate new life. So they, in the early days, were abducting children, abducting people in order to, and then going through experiments which were not very pleasant. But in particular, they were wanting the genetic information of humans so that they could change their own genetic makeup. And over the years, that has happened. So the Greys initially were those who we could say were without emotion and therefore cruel, to those who are now living much more in harmony with humans because they have interbred with us and taken on that genetic information. So finally, where am I coming to, my friends? Thank you for listening. I know there's a huge amount and I could go on forever, but I wanted just to talk about this. We are not alone, friends. There is so much going on. And it's not just to be us and them, it's me, us. That's all I'm wanting this to happen. So please be caring of yourself, be loving of yourself, be accepting of yourself. Ask that these parts of you that have been hidden do become revealed in a gentle and loving way. And remember that one of the most important things about being a human is about acceptance, creativity, but kindness and love and respect and honor. And that when being human has this amazing ability to embrace that which is different. And first we do that with ourselves. Please don't try to say, oh, come into my life so I can get rid of you. This is not a time for cancel culture. This is the time for saying, bring it on. Because for me to be my wholeness, to me to be all that I am, I need to embrace this into my heart. I embrace who I am. I embrace who you are. I do love you for who you are. Be kind, be gentle, be loving, and let's be expansive now and see everybody in their diversity and in our acceptance. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the HeartSpeak podcast with Dr. Christine Page. Please check out all HeartSpeak episodes in the podcast archive section on www.christinepage.com. HeartSpeak is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Sticher Radio, and now playing on iHeart Radio. You can also watch the archive podcasts on YouTube. Connect with Christine on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, including her newest Facebook group, The Great Mother Calling. Do share with family, friends, colleagues. Join us next time for another edition of HeartSpeak.